Welcome to your first mini lecture in a history of graphic design. Today we're going to be covering Chapter 1, The Invention of Writing. And in this chapter we are going to be discussing the Sumerians who invented writing and the Egyptians who combined words with images. The concept of art for art's sake, or that a beautiful object exists solely for its aesthetic value, did not develop until the 19th century. Until then, basically, images that people made were linked to their functions in societies. The use of tools was a major step forward in the human species' journey from a primitive to an organized state. The development of writing and visible language has its earliest origins in simple pictures. So, there is a close connection between the drawing of pictures and the marking of writing. Marked symbols, pictures, or letters drawn upon a surface became a graphic counterpart of the spoken word or thought, and these images are the dawning of visual communication. Early people used pictures called pictographs as an elementary way to record and transmit information. Here's a really nice example, some cave paintings from Lascaux, France. Now I want you to ask yourself, when were these pictures created and for what purposes were these pictures used? And then also, you need to be able to identify the graphic characteristics of most prehistoric pictorial forms. And I want you to think in terms of the elements of design. So this is going to bring up some of your old layout design skills, elements like line, shape, form, texture, and color. Pictographs were the beginning of pictorial art. They eventually evolved into petroglyphs and ideographs, which evolved into writing. So I want you to be able to compare and contrast these terms and their characteristics. The cradle of civilization, or ancient Mesopotamia, was where ancient humans established a village culture. You need to know in what modern day country is this located. The leap from village culture to high civilization occurred after the Sumerian people arrived before 3000 BC. City and social order and the invention of writing brought about an intellectual revolution that had a huge impact on social order, economic progress, and cultural developments. So, you're going to investigate the Sumerian influence on the evolution of writing. I want you to consider how was their culture organized and list some of the factors that contributed to the evolution of writing. Here is a clay tablet which shows the Sumerian symbols for star, head, and for water. And this particular clay tablet shows how they evolved from a very simple pictograph right here in this column towards a mature style of writing for the Sumerians that we call cuneiform. So starting at pictographs, then we're going to progress to cuneiform. This early Sumerian pictographic tablet contained the beginnings of the development of writing. So these are the earliest known forms of writing right here. Experts believe that this tablet lists commodities by pictographic drawings and are accompanied by numerals and personal names. What I want you to notice are the graphic characteristics, such as how are these pictographs formatted. Notice that there's horizontal and that there's vertical zones. Now, eventually, these pictographs progress to a cuneiform or to a mature style of writing. And what I want you to do is I want you to consider the tools needed and how these tools dictated the style of this new writing itself. And then once you look at this, kind of decide who was able to read and write and what did this mean in the social structure in this particular age. You're also going to investigate what impact writing had on civilization. I want you to look at a few categories, specifically literature. What can you tell me about the literature of this age? And what can you tell me about the law in this age? I want you to look at Hammurabi's Code, and I want you to research this code and be able to discuss 3 of the laws listed on this 8-foot tall stele. And during your investigations about the impact of writing, can you tell me, were there any other cultural institutions that were affected by the development of their writing system? Now, two natural byproducts of the rise of this culture were the ownership of property and the specialization of trades and crafts. Mesopotamian cylinder seals provided a forgery-proof method of identification and authenticity. So I want you to discover, what are these Mesopotamian cylinder seals? What are their characteristics, such as what are they made out of? And how are they used? Eventually, the gift of writing passed to the Egyptians and Phoenicia. The Egyptians evolved a complex writing system based on pictographs, and the Phoenicians eventually replaced the complexity of cuneiform with simple phonetic signs. This is an example of the earliest known Egyptian pictographic writing, and you can see that it's very, very crude and rudimentary in its nature. Now, eventually this progressed to a mature form of hieroglyphics, and this is a beautiful example from the 6th century. When early Egyptian scribes had a very hard word to express in visual form, they devised a rebus. So an Egyptian rebus is a form of hieroglyphic that's shown above. And I want you to be able to define a rebus. So a rebus did use pictures for sounds to write a desired word. And just for fun, can you guess what words this rebus represents? This is one word right here, and this is another word right here, and then we will discuss these in class. Next, we're going to talk about the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone was an incredible discovery, and it's basically a black slab that is inscribed with 3 different scripts. One of the scripts is in this zone on the top, another one is in this zone in the middle, and the final one is in this zone down here on the bottom. I want you to know the facts regarding the discovery and deciphering of this incredible archaeological artifact, including the 3 scripts that were inscribed upon this stone. Now, the discovery and implementation of papyrus as a writing substrate was also a major step in the Egyptian visual communications. I want you to be able to tell me, how important was papyrus in the Egyptian culture, and what are its characteristics as a writing substrate? Here's an example of a scribe's tools and palette. Scribes were one of the members of Egyptian society that could read and could write. So looking at these tools here, this is a empty or hollow kind of case or carrier for the reed styluses that were used by scribes. This leather pouch was used to carry dry ink cakes. And then this particular palette right here, the ink cake was placed right here. You added a little bit of water to it, and then you got a liquid out of it. These particular hieroglyphs down here are actually 4 different styles of hieroglyphs, and they actually illustrate the evolution of the glyph from right to left. The glyph, of course, stands for these tools for the scribe, and you can actually see really nicely in this first one, a very nice illustration, but you'll notice that they get more abstract as you go to the right. So, I want you to be able to define the various forms of writing in Egypt and their functions in Egyptian culture. There are 4 different hands, or manuscript hands. So here's the first one. This is an example of the hieroglyph for scribe. This is an example of a hieroglyphic manuscript hand for scribe. This is an example of a hieratic script for scribe. And then this is an example, finally, of a demotic script for scribe. These 4 particular hands were used at the same time, but they were used for different purposes by different people. So you need to be able to define that. And then, as we know, the Egyptians had a very complex culture in terms of the afterlife. So they actually combine words and pictures to communicate information in very complex narratives known as the chapters of coming forth by day, but we know them as the Book of the Dead. So you need to be able to tell me, what role these funerary papyri have in Egyptian society, and it was a very important one. And then, more importantly, what are the graphic characteristics of these Book of the Dead Scrolls. Egyptians also had a visual identification system, so they used scarabs as part of their visual identification. Well, I need you to know what was significant about the use of scarabs and what were some of the materials that scarabs were actually constructed of. So to conclude this mini lesson, these culturally rich and wonderfully advanced civilizations survived for several thousand years. And I want you to be able to summarize the visual communication legacy of both the Sumerians and the Egyptians and consider how these innovations paved the way for the creation of the alphabet in Phoenicia and the Greco-Roman Empire, which we will be handling in our second chapter.